Welcome to Arkham, Massachusetts, which I just recently learned is where all of the Arkham horror, Eldritch horror, H.P. Lovecraft-based games take place. Which is funny because I attempted to read H.P. Lovecraft's original novels a couple of times and the novels by other authors in that sort of universe, and I never really put that part of the story together. But I digress. Today we're going to be talking about Arkham Horror, the living card game. We're going to flip my usual formula on its head, and by usual formula I mean all 2 reviews I've done where I have talked about games that have maybe not received that much praise and talked about what I think is unique or interesting about them and who I think would enjoy them. Today we're going to be talking about a game that's gotten a lot of hype, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about who I think it's not the right game for. And as a prelude to that, I want to, express that I really like Arkham Horror, the card game, this game in this box. Way more than I thought I would. So much so that I went ahead and got a lot of it, right? A lot of it. And there's a lot of it to get, which is going to be something I focus on in terms of who the game is not for. Now, we live in an era where there is really just no shortage of games based on Cthulhu or expansions based on Cthulhu. I actually really like this game because it's a Cthulhu-themed word game where the words are worth different amounts of points depending on how many angles they are, and if you go crazy, you can just make up words. And the original Arkham Horror, the board game, and I've literally never played this. And we even owned Pandemic Cthulhu at one point, which was good. It was very good. It just wasn't as good as Pandemic, in my opinion. So, if you're anything like me, you already have plenty of Cthulhu-based games. And if you're anything like me, you avoid any game that even smells collectible, right? Like the plague, which this is a classic Fantasy Flight game that comes out frequently and where they're really looking for you to get your next fix with each subsequent expansion. But you might say to yourself, well, I could just go ahead and get the base game. How is the base game? Well, here's the thing about the base game. It's not a complete game. It's good, don't get me wrong, it's fun, and there's some really good reviews on Arkham Horror, and as always, this is the post-review show, so I really recommend that you go and you watch those other reviews. I'm going to be not trying to cover those same territory, but adding, I can just edit out this part later, so we don't have to be like all...
Okay, well, it's going.
As always, this is the post-review show, so I highly recommend you go out and watch many of the many other exceptional reviews of Arkham Horror before you watch this one. There's a really good positive review by the folks over at Shut Up and Sit Down, and there's a less positive review by the folks at No Pun Included. Both of those reviews do a really good job talking about how Arkham Horror, the card game, works, what's good about it, what they see as being problematic, and they both really focus on the base game, which is the first way that I want to deviate in my review, because, well, I guess I could just start there. In this box, there's a really interesting game, and it's in the same sort of living card game format. If you want a really good review of the whole living card game thing, the No Pun Included review of this game does a really good job talking about the history of that from the ubiquitous Magic the Gathering, which is still keeping local friendly game stores or local unfriendly game stores afloat to this day. And you should certainly check out probably the most successful living card game, which is Netrunner. Netrunner is a game that I avoided getting into because of the fact that I didn't want to have to buy more Netrunner and more Netrunner and more Netrunner in order to stay competitive or enjoy it. Even though it seems super interesting, I really liked the theme of it. And so I was hesitant to get into Arkham Horror, the card game, and the first thing that I wanted to know is, can I get by with just a base game, which is about a $30 investment? And I'm sorry to say that the short answer to that question is no. Unless you have more dispensable income than I do. I mean, yes, $30 isn't a lot of money, but what you get in this box is, in my opinion, not a great investment by itself. But bear with me, because like I said at the beginning of this review, I do love this game, and I own it, and I own a lot of it, and I'll get to that. So what comes in this base? Well, it comes with 3 scenarios. The way the game works is that there are cards that you use to make a deck, which, very similar to, say, Magic the Gathering, are based on different colors. And I'll just say that, very briefly, that the way that they handle sort of suits, first of all, the cards are beautiful. I love the backs. I love how the different colors have different, styles. They're not just different colors, but you can see that, for instance, this is like the magical one is different than, say, blue cards, which look like this. I mean, it just, artistically, it's great. In terms of graphic design, it's clean. There's not too much text on the cards, and the system is good. And I don't want to get into the ins and outs of the system. I just want to suffice it to say that the way that these cards work together is very clean and very effective. There are different kinds of abilities. Your character will have certain traits, physical traits that they'll use for attacking most of the time. They'll have a mental trait, which will be like a sanity check. They'll have a knowledge trait, which they'll use to investigate. And they'll have an agility trait, which they'll use for everything from evading monsters to picking locks to doing anything that's sort of dexterous. And the way in which these cards work is really effective because they will be either an event or an asset or a skill type card. These symbols here will show you this could augment a check if you wanted, and there might also be text down here which is separate from being augmented. So there's a lot of opportunity to really effectively build decks, which is the first problem with just getting the base game, is there are not enough cards in this box to really make decks. And the thing is, I think this is a great game, and I think it's super fun, but the most fun thing about this, like every living card game in existence, is making the decks beforehand and then playing through the scenarios. And why is that? Because when you make a deck and it fails, you made decisions that before the game even started that didn't pan out. And then you get to go back to the drawing board and say, you know what, this card wasn't any good and this didn't work out. I'm going to take these out and I'm going to put something different in. And I'm going to try, this card instead. And then you go back and you play, in this case, the same scenario, or in competitive living card games, you play against somebody, and then you win, and that's immensely satisfying because you built that deck. You earned that victory, whereas this game will come with a suggestion on pre-made decks. But even if you don't use the pre-made decks, even if you just, throw together a deck based on every character, beyond having a backstory, they'll have their traits here, which is like sort of their base ability that you're going to augment, and their physical strength and their mental strength. They will have deck building requirements. So out of the base game, just living up to these deck building requirements, there's not that much you can do other than just throw in all of the cards for green in this case. And then it feels like it becomes a much more random game. And that's fine, however, if you want a game that's based in the Cthulhu mythos, loosely, and has a lot of random luck and can be lots of fun but can be super frustrating, which is what this game will be if you just get the base game, for the same price, you can just go ahead and get yourself Elder Sign, which at $30, what I'm trying to say is that this is a better investment. Because in this game, which I highly recommend you get the base game, and then you go ahead and get yourself the Gates of Arkham expansion, which is perhaps the most necessary, this is in my opinion, the most necessary expansion for any game that I own. It really takes a pretty okay game, which is basically just Cthulhu Yahtzee, and makes it exceptional because it provides a lot of different, it provides more opportunities for making decisions, which in a game that involves a lot of luck, because the game is, where are they? A dice-driven game, and so you're obviously rolling dice, and anytime you're rolling dice, Sometimes you just, oh my, that's actually amazing. I literally rolled a statistically improbable amount of the worst possible thing I could roll. Those are like doom or whatever, right? That happens in this game. And it can be incredibly frustrating. And it can also be incredibly fun. I love this game, especially with the Gates of Arkham expansion. There are many, many expansions for this game, but in my opinion, really beyond Gates of Arkham, each subsequent expansion is sort of diminishing, additional utility. Yeah, if you play it a lot, then yeah, it's nice to be able to play Elder Sign in the Arctic or Elder Sign in Egypt. But that's all you're really doing is sort of changing the setting, adding in a couple of monsters. The base game is all right here in the box. The Gates of Arkham expansion significantly alters the gameplay and makes it better in my opinion. But really, the game is all here. Once you've gotten that one expansion, that's a ton of game. This is a great investment. I just don't think that Arkham Horror, the card game, stacks up with that investment, because unlike Elder Sign, which you can play again and again and again and again, and it'll always be a little bit different, you'll go up against a different Elder God, or I don't want to over-explain that game, but the point is that there's a lot of variability in Elder Sign that there isn't as much of in this core set. At the end of the day, there are only 3 scenarios, and once you've seen them all, you've seen them all. Unless you're building decks. You see, this really, with just the core game, okay, you've got this deck, you don't have that much choice about it, and instead of using dice, you use this bag here, which, no, this bag does not come with the game, and also this really great insert by Broken Token. I say really great, it's okay, it's better than what came in the box, but I'm still desperately looking for a better sort of storage solution here. So instead of using dice, you pull random tokens out of here, and this is actually pretty fun the way this system works. And like I said, there are other places where you can get a better explanation, but I will just, sort of give it my thumb of approval. It works well, but when you're just working with this core set, you're just playing Elder Sign with cards instead of dice is really what's happening. Because, well, first of all, right off the bat, you typically can only get 1 of a card in your deck, so that's 1 out of 30. And so you don't have that much ability to sort of guarantee you're going to get those cards you need, and so you're really just playing, a luck-based game where you're like, oh, I got lucky, or I didn't. And that's fine, it's fun. It's a good time, it's a good system. It's a good system because of the way in which they've handled the scenarios, where if you look at, so these are not cards that you would build your deck with, they're cards that you sort of make a scenario with, and they've done a really good job by differentiating them with, say, like those symbols that are associated, and then they'll have locations and things, and then there's just the right amount of story in this game. So the first time you go through those first three missions, it'll be really exciting because you will be making decisions that will have ramifications for you. They kind of oversell it as an RPG in a box. It's not, but it comes a lot closer to that formula than previous attempts at it. I'm thinking of Pathfinder, the adventure card game, which had some problems in its design in terms of just how random the locations were, whereas these are a lot more thought out, and by having these sort of differentiations, you could even pretty easily make sort of homemade or homebrew scenarios by saying, okay, add these cards and explore I don't know which location. I don't want to say any location because it'll be a spoiler, and I can't remember what the first location is. I think it's just somewhere in Arkham, let's just say. What's that?
It's his house, that professor's house.
Oh, yeah, okay, so the first location is a house. So you could reuse those house location cards in homemade scenarios, right? So there's replayability in that sense, but a lot of the charm of it is sort of missing, or just, it's like rewatching a movie. It's just not the same as the first time you watch it, except if you're making decks, because then it all of a sudden has a ton of replayability. Because if you go through those first 3 scenarios and get stomped like I did the first time, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to make a way better deck now that I understand how this game works, and I'm going to do everything completely differently. And then it's not boring to replay the scenarios because it's a challenge. And as I said, and I really can't stress it enough, it's a challenge that's a ton of fun, if you enjoy the whole process of sort of setting out all the different colors and saying, okay, I've got a 30 card deck I want to make, and if that is half of the game, that is at least half of the game in terms of the enjoyment of it. If that's something that sounds like a chore to you, like you just want to get into the meat of it, once again, get Elder Sign, unless you don't really like Cthulhu, and then don't get Elder Sign and don't get this game either. But if you are like me and you played Magic the Gathering once and your favorite thing about Magic was building decks and seeing if you could do better, then this game is great. But you won't get it with just this. You're going to need to start by getting a whole other one, right? And that's a little bit frustrating because, yes, this is $30, but really, we're talking for the real core experience, in my opinion, you need two. What do you get when you get two? You get the ability to put two of a kind of card into your deck, which is the maximum you can put in, by the way. Some cards are less. There's a lot of complicated rules, and let me just use this as an opportunity. They're not that complicated. In fact, the rule books, people complain about the Fantasy Flight, rule book system, where they have the rules reference and the learn to play. I am in the camp of people that think that this is an amazing system, especially for a game like this, where you won't need this pretty much after the first three scenarios, but you're going to keep coming back to this index for specific questions and then look it up and find the answer that you want, right? I love that system. However, there's a website on the interwebs that I'll try to remember to put into the description of this video that is a fantastic resource for building decks. I constantly find myself making mistakes that I didn't realize I was making. Yeah, if you're going to play this game, I highly recommend you use it. Anyway, the point is that when you get this second base copy, you give yourself the ability to actually make decks because you can put two of a card in your deck of 30 cards. And there's a huge difference between two copies of a card in a 30 card deck and one copy of a card in a 30 card deck. And so suddenly this goes from being a lot of luck to being a lot in your hands. And then what you can do is you can say, buy this expansion, which is the first sort of deluxe expansion that the game comes with. And this adds 3 more scenarios, or actually only 2 more scenarios, and more cards. And then you can keep going and you can get more scenarios in that sort of, this is the Dunwich legacy. Dunwich is like the white trash town next to Arkham. But it has a university there. There's a serious town and gown problem going on. Anyway, there's more scenarios, so suddenly you've got yourself plenty of scenarios, and unlike Elder Sign, where I feel like each subsequent expansion is sort of adding less and less, to the game, in this game, the more you add to it, you're actually adding more to the rest of the game. It's sort of each subsequent expansion adds more marginal utility, if that makes any sense. Because not only does it come with more cards, many of which can be used, say, at the beginning of the game in the early scenarios, but it adds new scenarios, it adds whole new characters, it seriously grows the game. But then you might realize, what is the potential problem here? Well, the thing is, a game that is a $30 game in this version becomes much more expensive, right? I mean, you're really looking at, right now, you are looking at $150 worth of game, $200 at full retail, right? That's how much game this is. And my wife and I have barely scratched the surface of the scenarios, and we've had a ton of fun, and I don't regret it at all. But it is, in my opinion, the kind of thing that you should either get, not all of, but at least be willing to get, say, 2 cores and the Dunwich Legacy, or at least 2 cores, and then if you like the first 3 scenarios, get the Dunwich Legacy. If that seems like too much of an investment to you, then yeah, get Elder Sign or get a different game. This is an investment, not just money-wise, but also time-wise, because as I said, that whole process of making decks increases the sort of game time of the game. And I was really hesitant about that. What's nice about it is that unlike, say, Netrunner, because this game is cooperative, once you've gotten a certain amount of investment, once you've gotten, say, 2 cores and the first deluxe and maybe, a couple of these, which is a good amount of money, good chunk of change right there, you've purchased enough game that I think you can now effectively build decks and really enjoy it. But you don't have the problem that a competitive living card game has, where your opponent might have out-purchased you, might be ahead of you by an expansion, and so they'll always be able to build a better deck than you. Because this game is cooperative and you're all working from the same pool of cards, it doesn't have that problem. It doesn't have the problem where you need to get the next expansion. I would actually compare all of this content in terms of price, if the price seems daunting to you. I would compare all of this to, say, the investment of going ahead and purchasing Mansions of Madness, right, which is a $100 game as well. There's a similar amount of game in here, and once again, coming back to the just sheer amount of Cthulhu-themed games in the universe, for me, I felt like, okay, do I want Mansions of Madness or do I want Arkham Horror the card game? How much Cthulhu do I want in my life? And for me, it came down to how much I loved building these decks, and really just how well this system works. This system works really well. Yes, there's story in the game in terms of you're in a house and you get to make decisions and there'll be flavor text. But really, the most story in this game comes from the fact that you'll be starting a scenario and you'll not have a gun in your hand, but you'll have this card called Prepared for the Worst, and you'll play that. And it's like you went into your closet and you pulled out your 41 Derringer and you're locked and loaded with this tiny little gun. And then when you start to run out of bullets, you open up a box of contraband and you load it up again. And you've got your buddy, Leo DeLuca, and he's got your back. Every time I play this game, it's just so evocative. There will be, you will have character-specific cards, which are a lot of fun, like Jenny's Twin 45s, which are amazing, and a character-specific weakness. She lost her sister in a mining accident. But you'll also have another weakness that'll be in your deck, and even that is a ton of fun. There was one game I was playing where the weakness was actually a stubborn detective, and my character was this homeless drifter. And so it was just so funny because it was the end of the 3rd scenario in the core set, and there's this giant monster, and here's, I pull up this stubborn detective, and you just imagine the stubborn detective's got you dead to rights. I'm bringing you in, Pete, and you're like, there's a giant monster behind you, but no, you have to evade the cop in order to save humanity. It's just fun and evocative, and it really comes through. And when you have the ability to make decks and play it again and again, those same 3 scenarios, it's really enjoyable to play through them again. But I really can't stress enough that if you don't think that building the decks themselves is going to be fun, if you would rather spend that time doing something else, don't get this. Get Elder Sign, or if you want to spend $100 on a lot of game that has a lot of theme and story, maybe consider Mansions of Madness. And if you don't like the whole Cthulhu thing anyway, maybe just don't get any of those. And if you're looking for a living card game, but you don't really like cooperative games, well, obviously, if money's no option and you just want to take the plunge, Netrunner is an amazing game. But if you are like me and you want a living card game that's a little bit less of a investment per se, I highly recommend you get Plaid Hat's Ashes. Now, this is truly Magic the Gathering in a box. And the best thing about this game, in my opinion, is that I think that this came out in 2014, maybe 2015. 2015, and this is all they've released so far. But they have announced that they're going to come out with a big expansion for it. And that's awesome, because in this box, which is, probably, I don't know, like $50, we could probably get it for $30. Or if you want to support retailers, go ahead and, pick it up full retail price. In this box, there is a ton of game, and it's a really great system. And once again, I recommend you go and check out the Shut Up and Sit Down review of it. I think they're doing a lot of really neat things here. I like the artwork. And if you want a competitive game where you build decks and then you see how they do, then I think this is great. If you're not into cooperative games and you don't love Cthulhu, but you kind of like sort of generic fantasy, this is a really great game. We played this last night in preparation for this review. And it's good. But the thing is, if you're like me and your number one gaming partner is your significant other, it's not quite as fun to build a deck and then you have this awesome chain and you're like, aha, I play this and that allows me to play this and you're dead. It's just not that much fun to beat up on your wife or best friend. I mean, if you have a relationship with somebody in your life, maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your brother, maybe it's your frenemy, and you love seeing who's better, you know, and that's just like a constant thing. Like, this is great. But for me, the whole time I was playing this, and this is a great game and a great system that I really, really like, but still, the whole time I was playing this, I just kept thinking how much more fun it would be to play Arkham Horror, the card game. A, because I kind of like the whole Cthulhu thing, even when it's cheesy. In fact, especially when it's kind of cheesy. B, because I would be working with my wife instead of trying to beat her up. So it's actually more fun when you pull something off that's amazing, because it's like you're cheering each other on. It's just a lot of fun to get through something together, to survive something together, or lose together. And especially, once again, I can't stress this enough, if you have enough of this game that you can go back and build new decks, losing doesn't feel like losing. Losing feels like, okay, I learned a lot, let's make new decks and try this again. But if you only had the base game, I could see that being really debilitating, because it's like, it was just luck. The tokens just came out in a bad way, or the cards just came up in a bad way. I don't really want to play that again. So, in a weird way, buying 2 copies of this game, even though it only comes with the same 3 scenarios, is actually getting you more play out of those scenarios. It's weird, but it's awesome. And I highly recommend it to the right person, but I just want to be clear that it's not for everybody. It's not for someone who doesn't like building the decks. It's not for somebody who's ready to spend at least $50, if not more, to really get the full experience out of it. But rest assured that I think that what is here is great.